with this video I try to explain as much as possible about this playstyle and what kind of things to look for in building this unique kind of playstyle, because Trick Room, especially in Little Cup, is a bit of an odd thing and mostly frowned upon when seen, but it's definitely something scary to look out for, because just like Tailwind, it can be extremely rewarding and not that hard to build with, but very hard to build against. And that's generally with these kind of playstyles that control speed. So without further ado, let me actually get straight into these kind of Pokemon. So first of all, I want to order the good setters. Like, we have the good setters, these kind of Pokemon, you will see at least one of these two of these Pokemon. Then we have the niche setters. These are reasonable if used properly for their specific role. If used differently than that, trash them. They are not worth it. There are better Pokemon, and mostly in these 4 Pokemon you will almost always see something better. Then we have the bad Trick Room setters, and why they are bad I'm gonna try to explain as much as possible, so you don't find new Pokemon, say in the next generation for Gen 7, we have maybe something else. Suddenly, if they share these kind of traits, be skeptical about putting these on your team, because they shouldn't be just plain forward put on the team simply because they are new. Be skeptical about their potential and understand how this could work. As with generally, these Pokemon shouldn't be thrown around on anything, but that's specifically around new Pokemon. Then we have the abusers, and why these are important I'm also going to explain, with their common traits and things to look for if you want to look for something different in these Pokemon, because this is just a sample list. Then we have other Pokemon that are worth using, and then we have lastly Trick Room sample itself, just to talk a bit more in comparison to what this team has and why this is just a good comparison for a team. So first of all, when we look at Trick Room, the first thing you're going to notice is the fact that Trick Room teams are a form of Bulky Offence. If they are something different than that, and I really just question as to what that would look like, because every team in Trick Room almost always looks like this. You always have something like Spritzy, Porygon, and or Pumpkaboo on the same kind of team. In fact, the only Trick Room team that I even know of in LC is very similar to this sample team, and the only thing different is it uses Pumpkaboo over Salasis and Amora over Cubone. That is the only difference in that regard, and that sample is quite weak against Pokemon like Magnemite, which is a balanced Pokemon that is very well noticeable for being able to wall break past other Pokemon, because balance itself is a good playstyle against Trick Room, because setting up Trick Room is a big pain. Even with these great setters and even with a proper build team, it can be a bit of a pain to set up. For Tailwind you have Prankster users and Galewing, but for Trick Room you don't have that, but you do have much more rewarding results, as this can literally turn an entire table from a team that works with the speed perspective into a form that you can't even prepare for, except for Bulky Offence in general. So first off, we have Spritzy. Now, why is Spritzy so good, and why did I want to make a new video about this? Because the set that I showed was one of the 2 sets. It was the defensive set that you can just as well use on Trick Room teams, don't get me wrong, but I also want to press on the fact that if you're going to use something different, try to at least use something like this. I use Thunderbolt, excuse me, let me correct this. I use Thunderbolt just to hit a certain amount of Pokemon, especially water types, as well as not letting these kind of Pokemon set up, not necessarily getting use of their speed, but rather being able to effectively abuse their offense right after that, because they can wall break effectively, or not being too prone against these Pokemon in general, as this allows me to effectively get a one-hit KO on these Pokemon. But besides that, Thunderbolt is a quite nice move combined with Fairy type coverage. It hits a good amount of Pokemon for neutral damage, and overall I'm quite happy for this. You can also opt it out for Protect, or maybe an Empower Ground, I think, or Psychic, but I'm not too much of a fan of that. Now, why is Spritzy so good, and why it is a Pokemon that you should consider. While you can also run a defensive set on Spritzy to deal better with fight and get more setup opportunity, this specifically set is literally like the most standard tank I can think of. This basically allows you to do good damage and take hits decently well. The issue with it is it doesn't have instant recovery, so Wish, you can run Protect, but if you are running Protect and if you want it to really be a solid fight check, something along those lines, run Protect on it over Thunderbolt or Psychic or Hidden Power Ground if you want to run that, which all by themselves are rare moves to begin with for Sprizzy. But yeah. Why is this Pokemon so good? Fairy type, being able to effectively deal with fight type Pokemon, being able to hit a lot of Pokemon with good neutral damage, especially with Moonblast Stab, and the fact that you have 17 special attack. That is huge in Level Cup, just saying. You have Aroma Vial, which basically means you cannot be encored by Cottonee, you cannot be taunted by something like Mienfoo, Apom, or Onyx. And that's basically all you need. That basically allows you to always set up Trick Room without being instantaneously punished for it or being prevented in doing so. Then we have Porygon. Porygon is great for its download ability or Trace utility. Trace more for the defensive department. You can run a defensive set on this, but that's not too great for using Trick Room, because with Trick Room you want to abuse it offensively as well. I run Ice Beam on this. You can just as well run Psychic. You can also run something else over Recover, like in Power Fire, Thunderbolt. All these kind of options are general options. This is just one of the random forms I can give you. You can literally run anything else if you want to. But with Download you basically have strong offensive utility with 19 special attack already. Download can give you +1 special attack boost instantaneously. You can set up Trick Room and then you can wreck teams easily. Many Pokemon just fail to stop you at that point. You can run 26 HP as well. I don't really know the importance of this, especially if you're taking hits from the special side a bit more. Then we have Pumpkaboo. Pumpkaboo is a bit of an odd one. It doesn't really share many traits that are specific. However, the fact that it just in combination with Bullet Seed and Will-O-Wisp, it already has about all its utility right there. With Synthesis it could outstall a lot of Pokemon, however this set is not about that. You would need to run the defensive set, which is different from the Trick Room set for the obvious reason of this one actually has some good balance between having good amount of bulk, having offensive utility. You can run Synthesis over Destiny Bond as well. I love running Bullet Seeds for the reason of it's the only offensive move you actually need alongside Will-O-Wisp, and that kind of combination basically allows for just great utility. The only thing that walls that combination is fire types, which thanks to the awareness of Diglett aren't that common to begin with, and you have plenty enough Pokemon to deal with those in the back normally, and I'm gonna talk about those later. Then we have Solosis. Solosis is also an odd Pokemon. It is not really a tank, it doesn't have much defense, but it has enough to set it up and then fire off with insane damage from 22 special attack, assuming you will run Quiet Nature. If you drop just 1 point, that would instantaneously drop 2 at once thanks to Nature. This Pokemon has basically the same kind of coverage utility as a Pokemon like Abra has. It has access to Recover as well if you want that, but I just prefer Regenerator. You can run Life Orb on this, but that would be very offensive, and then it would be much more an abuser than actually a setter in my opinion. With this it takes a hit effectively and is able to set it up effectively. It's not going to be able to revenge kill as well as something, or not going to be a safe net as well as something like Sash Abra, but for sure this thing is going to hit hard and going to be a very good asset on Trick Room teams, to the point where I would say it is one of the great setters. Then we have the niche Trick Room setters. Now what I said about Solosis, keep that in mind for Litwick, because if it's running Life Orb, this Pokemon basically does insane utility damage from Fire Blast and Shadow Ball. This coverage itself is just insane in Little Cup, or any tier for that matter. Fire plus Ghost is just good. It's not walled by much. In fact, only walled by the same Pokemon that would just be special walls, like Pokemon like Munchlax in particular, because it also has Stick Fat. However, Litwick also has access to Memento, has also access to Energy Ball to hit opposing Grass type opposing Water type Pokemon that could maybe take a hit from Shadow Ball better. This would actually be a very good asset of certain teams simply for the reason of this offensive utility combined with being able to deal with fire type Pokemon thanks to Flash Fire. The only thing those fire type Pokemon would do is either go for a U-turn if they are Larvesta, or go for a rare Rock Slide if it's Torchic, and Ponyta's completely walled by it anyway. The only thing it can do is Toxic or Wild Charge, which doesn't even KO. One at KO at least. Then we have Gottita, and I put Gottita on this even though it's not really a thing. The reason why Gottita can create this opportunity in the sense of once the opponent goes for too much offense and not keeping up its momentum constantly, this can basically come in, revenge something, and just set up Trick Room, allowing you to safely go from that point. It would be more like set up Trick Room, kill something, kill maybe another thing, die, let this thing come in, set up Trick Room again, that kind of scheme. Basically, in this kind of scenario, you are basically viewing most of the opponent's teams as basically breaking through his opponent's team piece by piece, and this Pokemon basically allows for that kind of utility, and it's specifically that kind of team isn't even that bad for Trick Room. That's actually a very valid reasoning for Trick Room, because then you really see how offensive this can be. And I'm gonna look into that, why that is in a moment. Then we have Yamuna. The only thing that I dislike about Gottita is it doesn't have Memento or Explode or something along these lines to Suicide, and that itself is a bit but still. Then we have Yamuna. Now Yamuna is basically your Cresselia-like wall. It has the 25 HP, 14 defense, 14. This is basically comparable to Porygon and Spritzy in a very similar way. The only difference is Yamuna, unlike those Pokemon, doesn't have that great offense. It also can't run a more defensive set, sadly. I think it would be running max 27 HP, and yeah, that would be it. I don't think I messed up this set. Could be wrong. No, I don't think I messed it up. I think the normal set is 25 HP, 14, 14, but could be wrong with that. Didn't look too much into it. Didn't look too much into Yamuna, I should say. I looked up the other Pokemon because utility reasons. Now the good part about Yamuna is the fact that it has access to Healing Wish, which is a rare move. It's a good move. It's a really good move. It also has Psychic. Generally just a Psychic type utility. It's pretty decent for Trick Room teams. Not great, but decent. You will also see a lot more Psychic type Pokemon as well as Ghost type Pokemon for that. Then we have Slowpoke. Slowpoke is your most passive Pokemon. This is the biggest problem. Oh yeah, it also outlasts LGM, I forgot to say. The biggest problem with Slowpoke is its lack of offense. The only offensive utility it has is majority of the time getting a Scald Burn, getting a surprise kill with Fire Blast, or generally threatening it out with its dual stab as if the opponent doesn't have an answer to it, even though every team has something prepared against both Psychic as well as Water. Maybe not the combination. Excuse me. Thanks to Regenerator, just like Colossus, however, this Pokemon is much more bulky, as you can see. Thanks to Regenerator, it is able to constantly switch in, set up Trick Room, switch out again, and this kind of comparison. That would be good for keeping the Pokemon awake, however, you are gonna take damage the moment you switch out because you're manual switching. You are gonna be pretty weak yourself, as I just explained, and that by itself isn't that great. And then we have Baltoy. Baltoy sets up Stealth Rocks, which is a great thing for Trick Room teams. It can set up Trick Room and can explode. That's literally all Baltoy has. And there is nothing else you should want from this Pokemon. Setting up Stealth Rocks is a big thing. I guarantee you it's a big thing. And nothing else you should look into this Pokemon because it's simply bad outside of that. Then we have Inky. Inky is more of a bulky offensive Pokemon like that, in the sense of somewhat of a tank. It sets up really just a bulky offensive Pokemon. It needs to set up. It needs to set up Trick Room. It needs to then set up Superpower. It needs to get enough kind of boosts to prevent Pokemon like Mienfoo from killing it instantaneously with U-turn. All these kind of Pokemon, all these kind of things are very noticeable inside of a weakness regard, as this Pokemon is very easily walled still with this kind of coverage, with knockoff, with surprise coverage like Psycho Cut or Rock Slide. But yeah. Then we go to the bad starters. You have Frillish. Frillish lacks the 4 move slots and has the 4 move slot syndrome. It wants to run Will-O-Wisp, Recover, Shadow Ball, Hydro Pump, and Trick Room. It doesn't really have space for Trick Room. It's Will-O-Wisp, Recover, that's going to be the offensive utility, and for the offensive utility it lacks most of this moves to be too effective. It does have good stats to be bulky offensive, don't get me wrong, and I really like using its evolution in doubles or in singles even with Trick Room, but in this tier, no, its pre-evolution just doesn't work like that, and that's just a sad part. Then we have Yanmask. Yanmask sets up Toxic Spikes, and that's all you should want from it. Toxic Spikes and Memento. It has decent offensive utility, much like its evolution, except for the fact that this is not like its evolution at all. It has decent defenses, but it doesn't have any recovery or anything from that durable regard. It would need to run Pain Split, and that's just a pain. Then we have Execute and Phantom. These Pokemon you would assume, oh, these are just simply bad. Well, Execute can Sleep Powder, has Ordinary and Harvest allowing for recovery. Same for Phantom with the recovery part, except it doesn't have Sleep Powder. Yeah, these Pokemon are just bad, keep it on that. And now we go to the abusers. Now, why are the abusers so important? On these kind of teams, you are gonna view mostly 3 setters, or 2 setters I should say. You are gonna see the rest of the team either glue or offensive Pokemon. That's it. That's literally it. The offensive Pokemon will be Pokemon like Skrelp. Skrelp is just the pinnacle of these kind of teams. On any team with speed control, Skrelp is always seen as one of the best Pokemon on that. Why? Because it is such an insane wall breaker. With this kind of set utility, you can also run Toxic Spikes, don't get me wrong. You can also run Life Orb if you even want. But I actually prefer Eviolite because I already get Embodied Chaos. It can run Scald if you want better accuracy than Hydro Pump. If you run Thunderbolt, Thunderbolt only hits, I think, Tentacool and opposing Skrelp. Hidden Power Fire hits only Ferroseed. If you run Hidden Power Psychic, you will only hit Croagunk, and that's pretty much your entire counter list right there. Everything else is hit insanely hard by Sludge Wave and Hydro Pump, to the point where it's almost always a 2-hit KO, except for very special defensive walls like Pokemon like Munchlax. Then we go into Mora. Mora can set up Stealth Rocks as well as being a pretty decent offensive Pokemon. This is more of a glue Pokemon, but still keep in mind the fact that ice coverage is insane in Lillicup. And if you can pull that off properly, combined with its pretty good special attack, like 17 is really good, that's great. That's just great. Earth Power with Hyper Voice basically covers about anything. Thunderbolt only adds to this, and having the ability to set up Stealth Rocks basically means you aren't even that weak to Larvesta. It's just a Pokemon that wants to take abuse of speed control. Then we have Clamperl. Much like I used Sticky Web's Clamperl, this actually works insanely well. You can set up a substitute and you can from that point sweep on. You can also run Shell Smash if you are gonna Shell Smash the last turn, but then I would say no, don't use it. Why? Because this Pokemon is too slow and too frail for that. It already needs support to set up effectively, so setting up a substitute can allow you to gain insane momentum. The only Pokemon that really walls Clamperl that I can straight think of out of my head would be Ferroseed. And all the other kind of Pokemon are more checks. So this Pokemon by itself is just an insane wall breaker, and the fact that it can turn around the speed tier basically means this Pokemon is the most rewarding thing ever. Then we have Cubone. Cubone works in a very comparable way to Clamperl. Even though it has better coverage with Boomerang and Rock Slide being not walled by Abra, for example, it still doesn't do its job as well. Why? Because this kind of coverage, how odd it may sound, as well as having access to even greater moves, also Stealth Rocks if you want to run on that. This Pokemon has a lot more to revenge kill, as well as a lot more to punish this Pokemon against. And specifically that is really just a pain for certain players. It does have great typing to fit on these kind of Trick Room teams, specifically for being able to check Pokemon like Magnemite effectively, and that's a great thing. With Boomerang, it can even one-hit KO the Scarfed Sturdy set if he runs that. Most of the time run Athletic for the obvious reason, or even Magnemite for a rare reason. Then we have Pokemon like Cranidos. Cranidos, as you can see, insane physical attack, access to Sheer Force, plus Life Orb, plus Rock Slide, insane coverage, all these kind of utilities. The only downside that I see is the fact that it only hits 9 speed. It hits 9 speed, I should say. That's actually pretty fast for a Trick Room abuser, but it's really worth noting, to say the least. Then we have Aron. Aron is just a placeholder for this regard. Basically, Aron has the same as Amora you can compare. It has good physical attack, it has some defensive utility, it has access to Stealth Rocks, and it has great rare kind of move coverage that really just wall breaks a lot of stuff, as well as Head Smash to just do insane damage, comparable to even Cranidos. A bit weaker, but comparable. And lastly, I want to make a special shout out to these kind of specific Pokemon that could find a certain niche as an abuser. We have Snubbull, which is an offensive utility for being the fairy type, comparable to Aron in that regard. Good offensive utility, good defensive stats, doesn't set up Stealth Rocks, but it does have great coverage moves, as well as provide good utility against fight type Pokemon. The only downside, Spritzy is going to be on those teams anyway if you think about it, and that's just nah for this Pokemon. Punchum is more like glue, it just happens to be the most perfect glue. Why? Because it just creates setup opportunity with Parting Shot, which is a momentum move, and it also provides coverage against Pokemon like Ponyard and such, as well as Ferroseed and such. Basically just a great Pokemon in general, especially on Trick Room because of its low speed here, and it doesn't need setup opportunity unlike Timber. Rufflet, I don't really know why I put this on. It doesn't even gain anything specific from this. It's just a bit of an odd thing that you could look for because it's also very offensive. That's access to good utility coverage. It just is a hindrance on most of the teams, again with the same speed issues and all that. Trapinch doesn't provide Stealth Rock support, and that's the biggest pain with it, but it does provide trapping support and allowing you to take on a certain Pokemon that might be a bit of a pain. Once Trick Room goes up, it can even abuse this kind, and its speed, it doesn't need that anyway, so. Corphish, running a Life Orb in the assumption. This can be a really nice offensive Pokemon. It can be a real pain for certain players to deal with, but it's really just good. It has access to Crab Hammer, access to Strong Priority, it has adaptability, it has knockoff and superpowers coverage, and basically it hits about everything with this insane damage. A good Pokemon on every team. Then we have Fungus, the pure glue. The only thing it has on that slow speed is the access to Spore, and that's basically it. And lastly, we're going to view the sample team, and we're going to view all the basic elements back again. We're going to see Porygon, Spritzy, and Colossus as standard sets. We're going to view Glue like Pancham. We're going to see Skrelp as a strong abuser, and Cubone as a strong abuser, with also the ability of setting up Stealth Rocks, which is always a great thing to prevent balanced teams from being unpunished from just using U-turn every time, and really just withering down your team faster than you can beat them. So I hope this video was helpful for all of you, and I see you next time.